Welcome to the Something About Sandy Film Fight Podcast with your host, Ash Baker.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Something About Sandy Film Review Podcast, the podcast that takes the best and worst cinematic efforts committed to celluloid and offers them up for you for your comparison. I'm your host Ash Baker and, well, let's get cracking, shall we? This week's theme is
Disney animations and their straight-to-video sequels.
Now, Disney had a habit in the 90s and early noughties of releasing super mega successful animated films, and then when they found out how successful they were, desperately trying to cash in by churning out these poor straight-to-video sequel. I mean, I'm talking as someone who loved Aladdin so much, I bought the VHS video of Return of Jafar, which is a theme that we might revisit in a later episode. But for now, I'm getting my groove on by watching Emperor's New Groove, back-to-back with its successor, Cronks New Groove. So grab the bucket of popcorn, an oversized drink, and join me on the couch for this week's pod. First up, we've got Emperor's New Groove, and here are the facts.
Year of release.
2000.
Directed by...
Mark Dindal.
Starring...
David Spade, John Goodman, Eartha Kitt, and Patrick Warburton.
Current Rotten Tomatoes rating.
85%.
Worldwide box office takings.
$169 million.
Where to watch.
It's available on Disney+. So, Emperor's New Groove tells the tale of a self-centered and arrogant Incan emperor, Kuzco, who gets transformed into a llama by the scheming sorceress Isma and cast out of the palace. Kuzco must team up with the lowly farmer Pacha to find his way back home and stop Isma and her bumbling but lovable henchman Kronk from taking power. Now, this is quite a curious film. I did a little bit of light reading and research online before watching, and there's several articles and stuff that hinting at a very long and troubled production. I think it started life in 94, but didn't come out to 2000. And the original plans was for this musical epic, drawing really heavily on all of these Incan myths. And it's actually turned out to be quite a light-hearted slapstick comedy affair. I don't want to dwell too much on the production stuff in this because I want to just review the film as it is. But it certainly does explain some of the more surprising aspects of the film. The first strange aspect being the music, or lack of. We start the film with sort of quite a toe-tapping upbeat number sung for some unknown reason by Tom Jones. And we see that in the opening credits that the music's written by Sting. So I don't suppose that's a massive surprise. Disney was starting to develop a bit of a habit of picking super famous British male singers to create their music in these 90s animations. Yeah, I'm principally thinking of Elton John for Lion King and Phil Collins for Tarzan. However, the next song of any note in the film is in the end credits, which is a slightly more serious song that earned Sting an Oscar nomination, actually. Apparently, Sting signed up for this project in the earlier stages of production when it was still the big musical epic, which makes sense. The Sting song is like a shadow of the film that this film was originally intended to be. It's not that it's a problem, it just adds to the sort of strangeness of this film. The rest of the soundtrack is fine, it's solid if unspectacular, but for a Disney film at this sort of time to not be packed full of catchy songs is quite a strange experience. And that's not the only difference. I would say that this is the most out-and-out comedy film from this period of Disney animations. I've read reports of crazy writing rooms where anything went, and I'm glad to say that a lot of that stuff seems to have made it to the screen. It's absolutely jam-packed full of gags, and some of the visual gags in this are up there with some of the finest silent cinema, in my opinion. So there's a scene in a restaurant with people trying to avoid being noticed by each other, and they keep kind of coming through doors and just at the right time and stuff like that. So there's a lot of kind of visual gags in there. There's loads of fourth wall breaking as well. Now, usually I'm not a fan of when films break the fourth wall, because I find that it can become really smug and kind of too clever for its own good, usually. But in this film, I think it's actually used really well. Often Kuzco talks directly to the camera, and there are some great gags, including one about a travel scene on a map, which really plays with your sort of film expectations and pushes the boundaries. The animation style is pretty similar to all the Disney films of this time, although it does allow itself some flights of fancy at some point, for example in Isma's lab towards the beginning, and there's some really interesting and colourful directions that the animators take away from that kind of standard aesthetic. So I feel that that's another element that this really sets this apart from other films of the time. I felt that the performances were really good. David Spade plays the spoiled emperor well. John Goodman lends acting heft to it, I think, and he's quite good as the sidekick Patcher. Patrick Warburton is great as Kronk, the naive henchman with a heart of gold. But I've got to say, the show is absolutely stolen by Eartha Kitt and her performance as the baddie Isma. She's right up there with the classic Disney villains. I didn't realise it was possible to completely chew up all the scenery in an animation, but somehow Kit manages it. And I've got to say, it's great to watch. She'd certainly give Cruella de Vil a run for her money. All in all, I was really pleasantly surprised by this film. It had plenty in there to make it recognisably Disney, but it had a crazy, anarchic air to it, which made it really zip along and provided some real laugh-out-loud moments. Apparently, it didn't do too well when it first opened in cinemas, but it found a new life on DVD, and hopefully it will now find a new audience on Disney+. My official rating is...
This has no right to be this good.
Next up, we've got Cronks New Groove, and here are the facts.
Year of release.
2005.
Directed by...
Saul Blinkoff and Elliot M. Bohr.
Starring...
Patrick Warburton, Tracy Ullman and Eartha Kitt.
Current Rotten Tomatoes rating.
0. Yes, 0%.
Worldwide box office takings.
Doesn't really count for a straight-to-video release.
Where to watch.
This is also available on Disney+. Cronks New Groove sees Kronk, the lovable side character from the first film, following his passion for cooking until a visit from his disapproving father looms, making him try more and more far-fetched methods to get the perfect house and family his father had always wanted from him. The film begins with lots of references to the original, including using the same story mechanism with the current day picture followed by a backstory, and a very similar song at the start to the one used in the first film. The story is split into 3 main parts. The first part involving Isma, who comes back with an evil scheme and manages to rope Kronk in. And another one is Kronk falling for a rival scout leader, played by Tracy Ullman, who, I've got to say, is doing the most ridiculously plummy English accent I've ever heard. And the final act is when the father finally shows up. This structure just makes it feel really episodic, and the through story of the film just isn't strong enough to hold the whole film together, which meant that I was left not really caring about any of the characters, which is just a real shame, as the first film worked really hard to build up interest and affection for those characters. And another thing is, there are lots of really knowing cultural references which just seem really out of place, and it feels like they're aimed more at the parents than the kids. So, for example, there's a character who does an impression of Gollum at one point. It just feels clunky, and I'd rather have them spent the time trying to write some better jokes rather than relying on the fads of the day for some cheap laughs. Although I've got to say that there's a reference to Evita, which will either make you think it's a masterstroke or it will make you groan. I currently can't decide which of the 2 camps I'm in. All the voice actors from the first film return. Although John Goodman and David Spade, their appearances are so fleeting you'd hardly notice they were there at all. Spade's Emperor Kuzco is particularly irritating in this film, as he's wheeled out seemingly at random in an attempt to pep up the movie, but it just becomes annoying and pointless. And again, that's frustrating because he was so likeable, unexpectedly likeable in the first film. Eartha Kitt has a good song about being evil, but other than that, it just feels like she's phoning the performance in, and then she's not in it for the majority of the film, so it's just in that first third. So it's a real shame, given how show-stealing her performance was in the first film. The film somehow felt longer than the first one, even though it was actually 10 minutes shorter, and to be honest, quite often I was quite bored, and given how much I enjoyed the first one, it was just a real disappointment. It had all the same ingredients, but the execution was really poor. They tried to carry on where they left off, but clearly had forgotten what it really took to make the first one so good, which, in my opinion, was originality, strong performances, and characters you actually care about. My official rating for this film is...
I'm not angry, just disappointed.
So before we get to the final summary, it's time for Top Trumps. Top Trumps, Top Trumps, Top Trumps, Top Trumps, Top Trumps. The first category is...
songs.
So there's only 2 in Emperor's New Groove, compared to 4 in Kronk, including one of the songs that was actually played twice. I felt the songs were better in Emperor's, but based on sheer numbers, Kronk has to win that round. So Kronk is 1 up. The second round is...
visual gags.
I've got to say that there's too many to count in Emperor's New Groove. It was absolutely jam-packed. As for Cronks New Groove, I think it had 1 or 2 good ones, but they really were a bit thin on the ground. So Emperor's wins that round, hands down. Category 3 is...
top sidekicks.
So Emperor's had Kronk, and I suppose Patcher, although he was a bit more than a sidekick because he was in quite a lot of the film. But with the second film, obviously Kronk was a sidekick in the first one, and now he's a main character, so that's a big minus in the Cronks New Groove column. The new sidekicks, so there's residents of an old people's home, and there's the love interest, they're just not up to the same standard. So again, I've got to give this to Emperor's New Groove. Fourth category is...
fourth wall breaking.
So both films did this to a certain extent, but Emperor's New Groove did it with a real sense of charm and panache, I felt. Whereas Cronks New Groove, it just felt tired and really lazy, and they didn't even keep it up for that long. They kind of forgot about it after a while. So Emperor's wins that round. And the fifth category is...
oh, cute kids.
Emperor's New Groove had Patcher's 2 cute kids, which really brought something to the film. And in the second film, they obviously realised that they were good characters, so they brought them through and then added about 10 more for these scout camp scenes. The new kids don't really add much, if I'm honest, and the film doesn't spend an awful lot of time getting to know them. But I suppose on sheer volume, again, Cronks New Groove takes the cute kids round.
And the winner is...
so after 5 rounds, I make that 3 for Emperor's New Groove and 2 to Kronk. So Emperor's New Groove just nicks it. And now for the final summary. I've got to say, I was a little sceptical of a film that had scored 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. I was like, surely it can't, no film can be that bad. But apparently I was wrong. I think what makes Cronks New Groove so bad is how good The Emperor's New Groove was. It's like that older brother who is just that bit better, that bit smarter and faster than you in every single way. Emperor's New Groove was really original and genuinely funny, and had strong characters you really rooted for. Even the self-obsessed Emperor was good company for the hour and a half of the film. But in Cronks New Groove, it just tried to pick up where the Emperor's New Groove left off, and it tried to use all the same ingredients as the first film, but it just executed them really poorly. It reminded me a bit of the cheap knockoff copies of designer clothes you used to be able to get on the market. So they look the same, but they fall apart after about 5 minutes of wearing them. Cronks New Groove was pretty much devoid of laughs throughout. I think there was 1 or 2 maybe. And it just didn't have much heart to it really, which is a real shame given how fondly Kronk was thought of in the first film. So in summary, I'd certainly watch Emperor's New Groove again, but but I would definitely avoid Cronks New Groove. That's it for this week. Let me know what you think of the films. Do you agree with my summary? Strongly disagree? Let me know. I'd really love to hear your feedback on the podcast as well. So if you have any ideas for film themes or podcast features, just let me know. The email address is somethingaboutsandifilmpod@gmail.com, and it's SAS Filmpod on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And it would also really help if you could leave a review and subscribe to the podcast on your chosen podcast provider. Come on, you know it makes sense. So, thanks for listening, and a special thanks to Joe Baker for all the music, Alison Moore for the voiceover work. See you next time on the Something About Sandy Film Review podcast.